The town of Itoro was a peaceful place, but there was one man whose name sparked fear and whispers, Adeyinka. He was not a criminal, nor was he a troublemaker. He was a businessman, known for only one thing, caskets. It was said that if Adeyinka smiled at you, it meant death was near. Not because he had any supernatural powers, but because his wealth depended on people dying. The more people died, the more money he made. And that was exactly how he wanted it. His casket shop, Adeyinka Eternal Rest, stood in the heart of Itoro. Rows of polished wooden caskets lined the front of his store, some simple, others grand and expensive. He had something for everyone, rich or poor, young or old. It didn't matter who you were, sooner or later, you would end up in one of his caskets. That was how he saw life. On this particular day, Adeyinka sat behind the counter, flipping through a book of sales records. Business had been slow. People were leaving too long, and he didn't like it. If only something big could happen, something that would make people rush to buy caskets, he muttered under his breath. As if the universe had heard him, a woman ran into his shop, wailing. "Please, sir. I need a casket for my father. He passed away this morning." Adeyinka quickly stood up, putting on his usual fake look of sympathy. "Oh, I am so sorry for your loss," he said, but in his heart, he was calculating the profit. He led her to the most expensive casket in the shop. "This was specially made from the finest mahogany," he said. "It's the best way to honor your father." The woman hesitated. "It's quite expensive." Adeyinka gave a small sigh and shook his head. "Madam, this is your father we are talking about. You wouldn't want him to rest in something cheap, would you?" The woman wiped her tears and nodded. "I would take it." As soon as she left, Adeyinka clapped his hands together. "One down, but I need more, much more." Night came, and he sat on his veranda, watching the quiet streets. A strange thought entered his mind. Why should I wait for death to happen? What if I could encourage it? His lips curled into a sinister smile as an idea began to form in his mind. Then suddenly, bang! Bang! The loud sound of something crashing in the distance broke the silence of the night. Adeyinka sat up straight, his heart pounding. Was it what he thought it was? His hands shook with excitement as he rushed inside to grab his phone. Something told him that tomorrow would be a very, very good day for business. The sun had barely risen when the news spread like wildfire across Itoro. People ran towards the federal highway, their faces filled with shock and fear. The smell of burning rubber filled the air, mixing with the thick scent of blood. It was a disaster. A ghastly accident had occurred in the early hours of the morning. A fully loaded passenger bus had collided with a fuel tanker. The impact was so strong that the vehicles burst into flames instantly. Cars behind them had crashed into the wreck, causing a massive pileup. Over 50 people lay dead on the road, their bodies burnt beyond recognition. Others were trapped under twisted metal, their weak cries for help barely heard over the noise of sirens and wailing relatives. People stood around, whispering prayers, hands covering their mouths in shock. But while the whole town mourned, one man's reaction was different. Adeyinka stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the scene with sharp eyes. Where others saw tragedy, he saw business. So many dead, so many caskets to sell, he thought, a slow smile creeping onto his lips. Instead of joining the mourning, he took out his phone and started making calls. "Hello, bring out all the caskets. We are about to make serious money," he said, his voice filled with excitement. He pushed through the crowd and walked towards some grieving families. With a rehearsed look of sorrow, he patted one man on the shoulder. "This is painful," Adeyinka said, shaking his head. "But we must give them a proper burial. You don't have to stress yourself, I can take care of everything for you." The man wiped his eyes. "How much?" Adeyinka smiled. "Don't worry, I will give you a fair price," he said, knowing very well that his caskets were anything but cheap. One after another, the families came to him, desperate to bury their loved ones. His shop, which had been quiet for weeks, was now full of customers. By the end of the day, nearly all his caskets were sold out. That night, as he sat on his veranda, he counted the money in his hands, his eyes twinkling with greed. This is it. This is what I need, he thought. Adeyinka leaned back in his chair, staring up at the sky. The stars twinkled above, but all he saw was the image of more accidents, more disasters, more caskets being sold. He clasped his hands together and whispered, God, let bad things keep happening. Let people die so my business will grow. A strange wind blew past him, rustling the trees. For a moment, the air felt heavy, almost as if something had heard his words. But Adeyinka didn't notice. He was too busy dreaming of his next big sale. Adeyinka's wish seemed to be working. In the weeks that followed the ghastly accident, strange tragedies continued to happen. A terrible sickness spread in a nearby village, killing dozens. A building under construction collapsed, trapping workers inside. Even a well-known politician died suddenly in his sleep. And with each death, Adeyinka's wealth increased. His shop never lacked customers. Families rushed in, desperate to give their loved ones a befitting burial. The more they grieved, the more he smiled. One evening, as he sat counting his profits, his friend Ton walked in. My brother, your business is booming, Ton said, shaking his head. But do you ever stop to think about these things? So many deaths in such a short time, doesn't it scare you? Adeyinka chuckled. Scare me? My friend, this is a blessing. Death is the only thing that never goes out of fashion. As long as people keep dying, I will keep selling. Ton sighed. But have you ever thought about what happens when karma comes knocking? Adeyinka waved his hand dismissively. Karma. My friend, I don't believe in such things. Business is business. If misfortune brings me profit, why should I complain? Ton shook his head and left. But his words lingered in the air like an unspoken warning. One night, Adeyinka lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His wealth had grown, but he wanted more. What if I could make tragedy happen faster, he thought. An idea struck him. He knew some reckless truck drivers in town, men who would do anything for money. The next day, he arranged a secret meeting with two of them. I will pay you well, Adeyinka said. All I need is for you to drive carelessly on the highway. Just a little recklessness here and there, no need to be too careful. One of the drivers frowned. You mean, cause accidents? Adeyinka shrugged. Not directly. Just drive in a way that increases the chances. The men exchanged glances. And how much are we talking about? Adeyinka pulled out a bundle of cash. This is just a down payment. Do your job well, and there's more where that came from. Greed shone in their eyes. Consider it done, one of them said. Adeyinka smiled. Business was about to get even better. That evening, Adeyinka returned home, whistling happily. But as he stepped onto his veranda, a chill ran down his spine. The air was unusually still. Not a single leaf moved. The night felt wrong. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, You pray for death, have you prepared for your own? Adeyinka froze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Who's there? He shouted. Silence. He grabbed the lantern and searched around, but there was no one. Shaking his head, he muttered, Maybe I'm just tired. But deep down, something unsettled him. For the first time in a long while, fear crept into his heart. For days, Adeyinka couldn't shake off the strange voice he had heard in the dark. But business was booming, and that was all that mattered to him. The reckless truck drivers had done their job well. In just a week, 2 major accidents had occurred on the highway. Cars collided, buses flipped, and lives were lost. And with every fresh tragedy, people came rushing to Adeyinka's shop, desperate to buy caskets. This is the life, he thought, watching his workers load caskets into a grieving family's van. One afternoon, as he sat outside his shop, a police van pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. Adeyinka, we need to talk, one of them said. His heart skipped a beat, but he forced a smile. "Officers, how may I help you?" "We received reports that some truck drivers have been driving recklessly on the highway, causing deadly accidents. We traced their movements and found out that they recently came into some money." Adeyinka's palms grew sweaty. "And what does that have to do with me?" The officer narrowed his eyes. "We heard you've been making a lot of money from these accidents. We're just making sure there's no connection." Adeyinka let out a fake laugh. "Officer, I run a clean business. I don't control who dies or how they die." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll be watching you," one of them warned before walking away. As soon as they left, Adeyinka wiped his forehead. That was close. But unknown to him, his troubles were just beginning. That night, as Adeyinka counted his money, a sudden, strong wind blew through his house, knocking over his candle and scattering his cash across the floor. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he muttered, picking up the notes. Then, bang! Bang! A loud knocking came at his door. His heart pounded. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he walked to the door and opened it. But there was no one there. Only the cold, empty night. His hands trembled as he shut the door. "I need to rest. Maybe I'm just imagining things." But deep inside, he knew something wasn't right. The next morning, disaster struck. Adeyinka's workers rushed into his house, panic written all over their faces. "Ogre! Fire! Fire, don't catch your shop." Adeyinka jumped to his feet and ran outside. His worst nightmare had come true. His entire casket shop was on fire. The flames roared high, swallowing everything in sight. The expensive caskets, the wood, the money stored in the drawers, everything was burning. People gathered, shouting and trying to put out the fire, but it was useless. Within minutes, Adeyinka's eternal rest was reduced to ashes. Adeyinka fell to his knees, staring at the ruins. His wealth, his empire, everything was gone. And then, as he knelt there in shock, a voice whispered in his ears again. "You prayed for death, now, death has come for you." Adeyinka's eyes widened in terror. For the first time in his life, he realized karma was real. The ruins of Adeyinka's eternal rest still smoldered as the sun rose over Aitoro. The air smelled of burnt wood and ash, and the once busy casket shop was now a pile of blackened debris. Adeyinka sat on the ground, his clothes covered in soot, his hands shaking as he ran them through his unkempt hair. His workers had all left. There was nothing left for them to do. His wealth, his business, his pride, everything had vanished overnight. People gathered around, whispering. "This man has buried so many, but today, his own business is buried. God does not sleep. Didn't I tell you?" The way he was celebrating people's deaths, one day, his own downfall would come. Adeyinka clenched his fist. He wanted to scream at them, to tell them to shut up, but deep down, he knew they were right. He had built his fortune on the misfortunes of others. He had prayed for more tragedies, more deaths, just so he could fill his pockets. And now, it seemed as if all the souls he profited from had come back to haunt him. For weeks, Adeyinka tried to rebuild his life, but everything he touched crumbled. He took loans to restart his business, but investors pulled out. He tried selling smaller caskets from home, but people avoided him. Rumors had spread, people believed he was cursed. Even his closest friends abandoned him. One night, hungry and exhausted, he went to his friend Ton's house. "Ton, please, just a little money to feed myself. I will pay you back, I promise." Ton sighed and looked away. "Adeyinka, when I warned you, you laughed. You were dancing on people's graves and now, look at you. Ton, please. I have nothing left." Ton sighed again. "I give you food, but money? No. You need to go and make things right with God." Adeyinka swallowed hard. God. Hadn't he mocked God with his wicked prayers? Hadn't he ignored every warning? Tears burned his eyes, but he quickly wiped them. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. Just when Adeyinka thought things couldn't get worse, they did. One evening, he sat outside his small rented room, staring into the distance, when a group of men approached him. They were angry. Furious. He recognized one of them, the son of a man whose casket he had sold for an outrageous price. "You cheated my family," the man shouted. "You made a fortune from our tears, from our pain. You took advantage of us, and now you sit here, expecting sympathy. You don't deserve it." Before Adeyinka could respond, they pounced on him. Blows rained down on him. Kicks landed on his ribs. He groaned in pain, begging for mercy. By the time they were done, he lay battered and broken on the ground. As they walked away, one of them spat at his feet and muttered, "This is just the beginning." Days passed. Adeyinka lay weak and sick in his small room, unable to move. He had lost everything, his wealth, his business, his dignity. And now, he was alone. No one came to see him. No one cared. And for the first time in his life, he understood what true suffering felt like. One night, he crawled out of his room and, with the little strength he had left, made his way to the town church. The moment he stepped inside, he collapsed at the altar. Sobbing, he whispered, "God, forgive me. I was blind. I let greed destroy me. I laughed at death, but now death is laughing at me. Please, give me one more chance." Tears streamed down his face. For the first time in his life, he felt truly ashamed of what he had become. Adeyinka lost everything because of his greed. He didn't care about the pain of others, he only cared about his profits. But in the end, karma came for him. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have, if you build it by stepping on the tears of others, it will eventually crumble. What you give to the world will always come back to you. Adeyinka once prayed for misfortune to fall on others so he could grow rich. But in the end, he became the victim of the very prayers he made. Thank you for always watching our videos. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories like this.